It's a beautiful day and I've decided to go for a run. Well, as you might be able to tell, I finished my run. Of course, there's a couple of indicators I've had a good exercise. One would be the sweat on my head and my face and everywhere else, which we'll talk about in the video. Two, I'm out of breath. And three, my head looks like it's a ripe cherry and it's about to burst. Whew, that's better. Back inside, I've cooled down a bit. But now, I could do with some hydration. Hello and welcome to our second unit, Molecules Biochemistry 102. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about water, the single most important molecule to life. For today's lesson, we have two skills objectives. One, we need to be able to relate the structures, properties, and functions of water in life. And two, we need to be able to predict what will happen to cells in hypotonic, isotonic, and hypertonic solutions. So in today's introduction, I went for a little run, and water played a pivotal role in my ability to do that, and more importantly, my ability to recover after going for the run. Now this is because water has many functions in life. Of course, many more functions than just demonstrated by some random biology teacher going for a run. So let's look at some of those functions right now. So after my run, you could clearly see the sweat, and as that sweat evaporated, it's going to cool the skin. We call that evaporative cooling. Many animals use this process, although they don't all sweat. For example, here's my dog using evaporative cooling from the tongue in order to cool down. So dogs pant, or sometimes even biology teachers, you can't ever unsee that, just so that they can cool down. Okay, so here we have a list of all of the functions, properties, and structures for water. This is basically what you need to be able to explain and understand to achieve objective number one. Let's go through the main functions first. As previously mentioned, cooling is a major function of water. Temperature retention is not quite exactly the same thing. This is really the way that we use water to hold on to a certain temperature. Of course, in the human body, that would be 37 degrees Celsius. Transport, moving things around, whether that's blood pumping around the body or even cytoplasm moving within the cell. Habitat, many animals actually live in the water. Of course, there's also living on the surface as a habitat as well. Continuous movement, so that water, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about objective number two, but that water moves in a way that drags other water molecules with it. That's extremely important when it comes to things like the capillary action of plants. Lubrication, as demonstrated from the run, being able to move our joints is extremely important, and it's liquid water in between the joints that allows for a lot of that movement with less friction. So what about the properties? Well, we can see that we have a list of properties here, and each of those properties is linked to a function. So when you're looking at this table, don't try to just memorize the entire table. Be able to explain your way through this. So let's go ahead and do this for each of the different functions. So for cooling, what property allows us to use water to cool? And the answer is evaporative cooling. As the water molecules on our skin, in the sweat, or whether that's on the tongue of a dog, are picking up heat from the environment, they're not vibrating and changing into a gas immediately. And the reason they're not doing that is because of the structure of hydrogen bonds. Remember, the water molecules are being held together. So as each water molecule absorbs energy, that energy can be absorbed into the hydrogen bond. It's only when there's enough energy to break the hydrogen bonds that the liquid water can then turn into steam and evaporate off our skin. And of course, in doing so, they bring that energy that they absorbed, that heat energy, with them. Okay, so here we see how the cooling of the body, which is a function, relies on the property of evaporative cooling, which is due to the structure of hydrogen bonds. Let's look at the number two. Number two, temperature retention. So for temperature retention, we're talking about not changing your temperature, not necessarily cooling or heating up, but if you walk out into the snow, you don't want your internal temperature to drop really fast. Or perhaps you live in a hot climate and you walk outside, it's a really bright hot day, you don't really want the temperature inside your cells and your body to change too much. Well, which properties of water allow for this? And there are two. One is a high specific heat capacity. Now, the specific heat capacity of a substance is the amount of heat energy that it will absorb before it changes temperature. Now you must know the difference between temperature and heat. So heat is a form of energy, whereas temperature is a measure of the vibration of molecules because of that energy. So what we say when we're saying something has a high specific heat capacity is that the molecule, in this case water, can absorb a lot of energy without actually changing its temperature. Now, why would that be? Well, again, it's because the hydrogen bonds are soaking up that energy. So we can heat water and not change its temperature because the heat energy will be absorbed into the hydrogen bonds. At the point the hydrogen bonds start to weaken and break, then the molecules will start to vibrate and the temperature will increase. Now, a second reason why water is so good at temperature retention is that water is in fact a reasonably good insulator. Okay? An insulator is a material that doesn't accept heat, okay, that doesn't absorb heat very readily. Now, why is water an insulator? Well, of course, it's made of non-metallic atoms, oxygen and hydrogen. And as we know, non-metallic atoms are more of an insulator than metallic atoms. Okay? So the reason why we don't change temperature very, very quickly is we have two properties: high specific heat capacity because of hydrogen bonds, and insulator because of non-metallic atoms. Our third function is transport. What properties allow water to transport things around within the body or within cells? And again, there are two here. One is that it's a universal solvent. Now, why is that important? Well, a universal solvent isn't something that can dissolve everything in the universe, but it is something that can dissolve anything with a charge. Why can water dissolve things with charges? Let's not forget that each water molecule is a polar covalent molecule. And what that means is it has a negative oxygen and a positive hydrogen. So if we try and put something like, for example, salt, which we know is an ionic compound, a positive sodium and a negative chlorine, into water, it's going to mix in very well because the positive sodium will be attracted to the negative oxygen and the negative chlorine will be attracted to the positive hydrogen. Now what this means is that any substance that's either consists of polar covalent bonds or consists of ionic bonds is going to dissolve in water. This explains why water dissolves sugars and salts but doesn't dissolve things like sands. Now the second reason that water is so good for transport is that it's a liquid. Okay? Why is that important? Well, obviously if it was a solid it wouldn't be able to move around. If it was a gas, it would be able to move around, but it would escape its container. And given that its container is the cells of our bodies, that would not necessarily be a good thing. So water being liquid means that it can move, but that it won't escape itself. Each water molecule is still stuck together. Now, why is that? Well, that's because water has hydrogen bonds. So the hydrogen bonds hold the water molecules together, and that means that they are liquid. How about in terms of a habitat? You know, fish and other things that live in the seas, the oceans, the rivers. Well, obviously, the most important properties for that would be that it is liquid, but also that it is transparent. We need to be able to see through it. So why is water liquid? Well, water is liquid because of the hydrogen bonds. Okay? If you think about it, water consisting of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen, it really should be a gas. These are very, very small atoms. So they should be light enough and not dense enough that they should be able to float away from each other. Why can't they? Because of the hydrogen bonds holding them together. Okay? Now, why is water transparent? Well, water is transparent because it consists of transparent atoms, very, very small atoms that do not reflect light, like hydrogen and oxygen. How about living on the surface? Well, that's down to the property of surface tension. Now, anybody that's ever taken a belly flop into the swimming pool knows that if you hit the water at a certain angle, it smacks back. Okay? Well, many living things, especially things like insects, pond skaters and others, can actually use that surface tension, that almost film-like property of water at the surface, to actually live on the surface. Now, what they're actually standing on is the hydrogen bonds between the molecules. So if it wasn't for hydrogen bonds, animals like the Jesus Christ or basilisk lizard would be unable to run on water, and other little insects would be unable to live on the water either. What about continuous movement? Well, the property we're really talking about here is capillary action, and that's down to water having cohesion and adhesion. Now, cohesion means to stick, so cohesion is sticking together, and adhesion means sticking to something else. So why is water able to stick to itself, allowing for this continuous movement? And why is it able to stick to its container? And the answer is hydrogen bonds. So if you think about a plant, for example, and water enters the roots and it has to travel up the stem all the way to the leaves, well, each water molecule is linked to the next water molecule in the chain because of these hydrogen bonds, and that allows these water molecules to pull each other up through bicapillary action. The final function we're going to talk about today is lubrication. So lubrication means that when two surfaces are rubbing against each other, they don't have too much friction. That's going to be really important when you're doing things like moving your joints. Okay, so what's the property of water that allows it to be such a good lubricant? And the answer is, of course, that it's a liquid, which we've already explained is down to the structure of its hydrogen bonds. So here again we can see that each of the functions relates to a property, or maybe two, and those properties relate back to structures. Now what everybody should be able to do is relate the functions of water to the properties to the structures, but also go in the reverse direction. So SPF can also be FPS.